Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Rabbi Sarah Berman. I'm the Director of Jewish Culture and Programming here at Central Synagogue, and I am so happy that we are together this evening. It is a pleasure to be joining on this particular stage Rabbi Ari Lorge for our evening event kicking off our year of looking at Jewish diversity. Diversity can mean so many things. Jews are a diverse people when it comes to our beliefs, when it comes to our religious practices, when it comes to our families, to our identities, and to our cultures. And this year we're going to be exploring all of those strands together through our programming. So tonight, we are so delighted to be joining Naama Shefi, the founder of the Jewish Food Society and the editor of the new cookbook, The Jewish Holiday Table. Naama was a kibbutznik born in Israel and a New Yorker, now by residency and by identity and love. Her work sits at the intersection between food, culture, community building, and art. Clearly, I'm into it. In 2017, she founded the Jewish Food Society, a nonprofit organization which preserves and celebrates Jewish culinary heritages through a digital recipe archive, and now through this book, as well as a whole variety of events. In the summer of 2021, she launched ASIF, a culinary institute in Israel, a center in Tel Aviv dedicated to exploring the diverse and creative food culture of Israel. Naama lives on the Lower East Side with her husband and her daughter and is here tonight to talk to us about the Jewish Holiday Table. Let's welcome Naama. Now that you know us, we want to give you a chance to know who you are sitting with. So for the next couple of minutes, we're going to share a question with you, so just wait. We're going to share a question with you and then invite you to speak with somebody else or some else's at your table. So Naama, to give us our question.
Sure. So thanks so much for this warm introduction. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. So we are always curious to ask, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about Jewish food? Really, when you think about Jewish food.
All right, there's your question. Talk to a neighbor. Thank you all. Look, these stories could go on forever, and we know that, and we hope you will continue these conversations later in the evening when we break to start eating some food. We hope that when we break to start eating some food, you will continue talking about food. Now we're going to just hear a couple of examples of what you just talked about. We've up here at the front, we talked a little bit about baking, about the holiday of Sukkot, about Jewish soups, and about herring. Now, can you guess which one of us was talking about herring? Spoiler, it's Naama. What were some of the food memories summed up in about 10 words that you may have shared with someone at your table?
We were talking about if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardic. So I guess most of us were Ashkenazi. So immediately chicken soup and brisket. Yeah, with matzoh balls and brisket.
Thank you. What other ideas came to mind when you were?
Potato latkes.
All right, great choices. More than one, it looks like. Anything else? I hear some chopped liver, simmis. Oh, we have a strongly Ashkenazi group here tonight.
Oh, does anybody ever remember when my mother got the chickens from the chicken lady, and she would make soup on Friday night, and there were tiny little eggs still in the chicken? Who said yes? So it was a big fight with my brother and I who was going to get those eggs. And if there were 5 eggs in them, it was a battle royal. So they were delicious. They were boiled up in the soup. So I was just telling and they were very little, but delicious.
One more? Great.
To me, the most striking discussion at our table was that we all talked about our mothers and grandmothers. And so that, for
Mothers and
me,
grandmothers.
I mean, we also talked about lots of different foods, including everything everybody's already mentioned, but that's the sort of the lineage, right? And the generation to generation.
Well, generation to generation is exactly what this cookbook does and what the Jewish Food Society does.
I'm wondering, just based off that question, and we'll talk about the Jewish Food Society in just a second, but I noticed the dedication in the book. Could you tell us a little bit about how you made that dedication, why that dedication, what the decision was? People are now flipping to it, so we could also read it out loud for those who don't have it in front of them.
Sure. Do you want to read it? And then I'll happy to answer.
So the dedication is, to the cooks of our tradition, most often women, who have built the Jewish kitchen and tended to its flame, making sure its light never goes out.
When I think about Jewish food, I really think that it captures our DNA as people, as the culture, and I think is extremely important to remember that and to honor our mothers and grandmothers. And I am particularly was inspired by my now husband, then boyfriend, grandmother, Nona, and this dedication is really, I had her in mind with that, and we can maybe talk about it more later.
So I gave a one-line introduction to what the Jewish Food Society is, but can you tell us in more depth, what is the Jewish Food Society and why did you decide to found it?
Sure. So we are a nonprofit organization. We are based here in New York City. Some of my colleagues are here. I'm very lucky to work and create with an extremely talented team of hardworking women. And we work to preserve and celebrate and really push forward Jewish culinary heritage from all around the world. So from places as far apart as Buenos Aires, Paris, Hungary, Ethiopia, Israel, Brooklyn, and more. So we are building the largest archive, the largest collection of Jewish family recipes and the histories and stories that are attached to them. And in our work and what we do is that we bring this research to life with all sorts of public programs. They could be a program like the one that we're sharing tonight. It could be a storytelling program, educational panels, cooking classes, and that's what we do. We also have a podcast. It's called Schmaltzy. Amanda Dell is the host of the show, and it's about food and Jewish identity.
What made you decide to undertake this project? What was it about Jewish food that made you decide to make this your work?
I'm trying to think from where, how to address your question. I think it's if it's okay, I'll just share a little more about my background because I think it's kind of inform the answer. So as you mentioned in your introduction, I was born on a small kibbutz in Israel. It's called Givat HaShlosha. It's in the center of Israel. It was a pretty lovely place to be. As a child, we were walking barefoot all the time, picking up pomegranates and figs and citrus from the trees, living the good life. But not everything was ideal. We ate all of our meals in the communal dining room, in the Chadar Ochel, together with 500 people at the same time. So breakfast, lunches, dinners. And the community part was lovely. The menu, a disaster. Seriously. It was just very repetitive and just not good. And mainly what happened is that it was like fuel, you know, food was really, the recipes were divorced from the identity and the stories of the cooks. And it was a little bit like the Truman Show. And I wanted to know what's outside of the bubble.
What was the worst thing that you remember eating? The worst thing?
Fried calf liver was like an everyday situation. That was like the thing. But breakfast, by the way, was beautiful because it's fresh food, you know, vegetables, and honestly, like, I don't know if you know, but the iconic Israeli breakfast is really, like, the roots of that started in a kibbutz breakfast. So that was a highlight. But food became this medium for me to explore the life and culture outside of the kibbutz. And at the time, I grew up in the 80s, at the time we still shared cars. We shared everything in the community, but we had 17 Subaru cars. So if you wanted to reserve one, you needed a good reason, like going to the city to see a doctor or for a wedding or to visit a relative. But I was a very stubborn kid, and I convinced my parents to secure us a car and to always go to places to try food and to meet people and to explore the very diverse culture of my country.
Did you have destinations in mind, or your parents were exposing you to things? What was that process like?
It came from me, from things I saw on TV, and I was just curious. So from reading the paper and things like that. So we went to the Yemenite Quarter in Tel Aviv to eat Yemenite soup, and to Kfar Qasem, which is an Arab village that is not far from my kibbutz, to eat hummus and falafel and lamb, and to Or Yehuda to eat kube, and all around. We had a good time. But that was really like the start of that. It wasn't a professional thing, but I just thought that it's important to share that this connection of food as storytelling or as a medium to explore culture started there.
Only because I've had the opportunity to see the book longer than everyone else. I know that part of the story, I think, continues with the woman who is part of your inspiration for the dedication, right?
Nona, yes.
Nona. And there's a beautiful picture of her in the book and your first meeting. And I think that was also a very powerful, important night for the seeds of this idea. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
All right, will you share that with people so they don't have to wait to read?
Sure, with pleasure. So it was the first time I met my husband's family. So he told me, you're going to meet my parents and my grandparents and my siblings and everyone in the family at once. So it was, pressure is on. And so we arrived early to Nona's apartment outside of Tel Aviv in a town called Givatayim. Nona, by the way, that's the way the family called her in Ladino. Her real name was Katy. And this evening definitely made an impression. First of all, we arrived first, and the apartment was tiny. Like, I'm talking about a one-bedroom apartment, tiny space. And I thought, like, how she's going to fit 25 guests here. And Ilan told me, you'll see. It's like magic. And he was right. And slowly they all gathered around the table. It was crowded but very warm, and she started serving, like lots of plates. There were many variation on eggplants and stuffed tomatoes and peppers and albondigas and Swiss chard pie and like lots and lots of things. I never seen anything like that, never tasted anything like that. I was absolutely amazed by the deliciousness and the hospitality. But more than that, I was amazed by the stories behind each of these plates that really represented our journey. Our journey from Izmir, at the coast of Turkey. They crossed to the island of Rhodes in Greece, from there to Zimbabwe, and then to Israel. And I looked around the table and I asked many questions. Why did you move from here? And she started sharing like important pieces of her life. And I saw that people around the table sometimes didn't know about that. And at the time she was older, she was 84, and I thought that we need to protect that. We need to protect our treasure box. So that evening planted a seed.
So this, your husband, now husband's grandmother, her Jewish story took her from Turkey to Greece to Zimbabwe to Israel. Coming from Turkey, presumably her family had once upon a time been in Spain.
Exactly.
Jewish life, Jewish culture happens in all of these places. How can we understand what Jewish food is when Jews and Judaism exist in so many different places? What can we learn about Jewish food from these stories, from these histories?
So that's a great question. And I think that there is not one standard definition. But when I think about Jewish food, I think about the people, exactly as you said, that lived for thousands of years all around the world, and how they created these, what I call micro cuisines, like their creation that was, very much inspired by the local food traditions in all of these places, and the terroir and the people, in constant negotiation with the laws of kashrut, Shabbat, and Jewish holidays. So I think that's really what we are talking about when we're talking about Jewish food. But on that, I feel another very important aspect is the cuisine of wanderings. And I think that's what, unfortunately, is very unique to us as people. And I'm thinking about Nona's menu, but I also think about so many examples in the book. Jewish families oftentimes were forced to flee and live for their lives and move from one city to another, many times to another country, many times to another continent. And this journey reflects on their plates. So I'm thinking about Fanny Gershon from our book. She's an incredible chef who is based in Brooklyn, here in the city. And her family immigrated from Ukraine to Mexico City in 1927. And from Mexico City, she moved to Brooklyn. So we can talk more about our Passover incredible, delicious menu, but even think about our matzo ball soup. It has like this very deep flavor of schmaltz forward, what we all know, or many of us know, as like traditional chicken soup, but she adds fresh lime and cilantro and jalapenos and avocado. And it's a direct reflection of her family's journey. And I think that this is really unique to Jewish food.
How did, when you started the archive, you were immediately inundated with recipes. How did you get that going, and how many recipes are there now?
That's a very good question. So it's interesting. It was at the very beginning, myself and Deborah First, who is the amazing co-author of this book and also the editor of our archive. I remember we sat down together and we compiled a list of like 100. Then it grew, but we started with 100 dishes that we thought that we need to have before we even talk with anyone. And we went after families and chefs that we knew, some famous, some not, some friends of friends, and we started this research. But the list was some of the classics that we all know, but from the beginning, it was very important to us to go after dishes that represent communities that are maybe lesser known, at least in New York. So that was like the very beginning of that. And to answer your other question, today we have more than 1,000 recipes and the histories that attach to them. And from the beginning, it was clear that our method would be one that we will, when possible, we cook with people in their in your homes. I'm addressing you in this way because I really invite you to submit your family recipes and to go through this process, because I think it's an interesting process to a family, but we can talk about that. But there is a lot of learnings that happen in the environment of a kitchen. And when I think about that, it's like from the two sides, from the culinary side of things and the history and the story. Because many Jewish cooks, when we talk about oftentimes from older generation, like the recipes would be etzetale, or like very, very basic form of a recipe. And many of these recipes are also more advanced or complicated, and there is a lot of knowledge there. And we go and we observe and we translate a little bit of this, little bit of that to a working recipe.
How then do you go from archive to cookbook? An archive is a broad collection. It's what you're describing is cultural anthropology. You are creating this this record of the breadth of Jewish foodways. A cookbook has a story. How did you take all of what you'd amassed in the archive and decide what stories to tell in a book?
So at the beginning, when we got the opportunity to bring our research into a book, the first thing was that we thought about what's even the way to organize the information. And we decided to go around highlighting the Jewish agricultural calendar and the Jewish holidays, because this is where you can really find dishes that are uniquely Jewish. So that was just like like a principle at the beginning. But to answer your question, we really prioritize the stories. of course, the recipes in the book are extremely well tested and they're amazing and delicious, and I really invite you to give them a try. But a friend, it actually is in the book, Mitchell Davis, once told me that food without a story is just calories. And I can't agree more. So we wanted to make sure that there are important stories about our people that are in the book. And another principle was to celebrate Jewish diversity. So this is why you'll find, again, recipes and stories from families from Brazil, Paris, Tunisia, Hungary, Ethiopia, and many more that just we don't really get a chance so often, at least not in New York, to interact and to learn about their history and stories.
Through this process, what's the most, not just the cookbook, but even just the collecting and the archive and the Jewish Food Society, what's the most surprising thing you learned?
I mean, again, there are surprising things that, like, culinary-wise, that I didn't know, and there are, like, the stories and the pieces of learning. So one recipe that comes to mind is a recipe to break the Yom Kippur fast, and it's a recipe for a dish called zom. And I never heard about it before. It's came from a cook in Tel Aviv with roots in Yemen. And it's a very simple dish, probably has some Ottoman influences, but the dish is a warm yogurt soup that the family serves with schug, this herb-packed spicy sauce.
Which Trader Joe's now sells.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's
Oh.
not very good, but they sell it.
That's a good intel.
Schug is very good. Trader Joe's schug is not as
well,
good.
there is a recipe for schug in the book. It's very, very easy to make. So it's a secret, like something that you can keep. So that was very interesting because it was so popular, or it's so common across many Jewish families that I know that came from Yemen, and it makes so much sense. Like, it's something that you can fix in 5 minutes, but it's so satisfying and beautiful. So that was surprising on the culinary side. And maybe not surprising, but there are so many stories in the book that I kind of took for granted, but just now and maybe post-October 7th, I just experienced them in a complete different way. So there are many stories or families that shared with us how they got together before a holiday. It could be Purim, it could be Shavuot. And when I say got together to prepare for the holiday, it's not just the day before the immediate family. Talking about the entire, big chunk of the community to get together well in advance and spend time together. And I think that there is safety in numbers, and I understand it in a different way. And it's not something that we practice anymore, and I just think that it's very interesting.
Each one of these recipes, or each one of these menus, really, because each holiday isn't just an assortment of recipes, it is a family's menu for that holiday. Each recipe, each story, it comes attached to a family. Can you tell us a little bit about the people you got to know as you were creating this project?
Sure. Again, I'll just explain this choice because many times in cookbooks you would have appetizers and main courses, desserts, but it was important for us to share the entire menu because it will allow for the reader to get a deeper experience of the rituals and the texture and the gestures around the table. So this is why we thought that we would do that, and also it's like it's a complete menu, and it's it's nice. Thinking about the people, there are so many. I'm thinking about Yonit Naftali. She's a food writer that is based in Tel Aviv. She's very humble and talented, and she shared a story for Purim. Her grandmother was one of 10 siblings, and only 4 survived Auschwitz, and she was left with nothing, literally, and the only thing that she had was the recipes, like the exact recipes for all of the Jewish holidays. And so in her family, it was, like a religion to make the recipes the very same way her mother used to make them. So for Purim, she was responsible to deliver a mishloach manot, this care package of goods, to her neighbors. And she told us that as a child, it was embarrassing for her because it had all of these Hungarian cakes, fluden and bagel and other cakes, and all of her other kids in the neighborhood would have store-bought treats, and also they were from North Africa. So she always felt embarrassed to share that. And of course, today as a mom, I can definitely relate to that. But she said that one day a neighbor came in, brought back the actual plates, and she said, I'm waiting for your mishloach manot every year. Do you have anything left? And Yonit said that it was that moment that her embarrassment and shame replaced in pride. And for me, it's a very short story, but it's a story about grief and survival and acceptance in a new country, and shame lead to pride, all through food.
So before we turn to your questions, I mentioned at the beginning that you founded not only the Jewish holiday table, but also Asif.
The Jewish Food Society.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The Jewish holiday table. You edited the Jewish holiday table, founded the Jewish Food Society, but also Asif.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that project as well?
Sure, absolutely. So Asif is the Culinary Institute of Israel. It's an actual place in the heart of Tel Aviv, and it has a different mission, although related to Jewish Food Society. And at Asif, we work to nurture the extremely diverse food culture of Israel. And so it's at the space we have a public culinary library with more than 2,000 culinary titles in many languages, in French and Arabic and English and Hebrew and German and etc. A small gallery, art gallery with rotating food-related exhibition, a rooftop farm where we are in touch with the Volcani Institute and we plant things in collaboration with the gallery, a restaurant, and a provision shop where you can find some of the most interesting and beautiful products from small producers. And like Jewish Food Society, we also host all sorts of pop-ups and panels and food-related educational programs. So that's what Asif does.
So you clearly have a lot of time on your hands because you're not doing anything. I'd love to open it up for some questions from our community here. Any questions that you have about the cookbook, about Jewish Food Society, about Asif?
This is wonderful. Thank you. Very interesting.
Thanks.
So, being kosher is a real challenge, I would assume, especially if you're fleeing from one country to another. And not only are you talking about tradition and rituals, but do you have any stories around, trying to stay kosher, or did that matter very much sometimes?
I mean, there's so many different families with very different experiences. So I don't remember on the top of my head like a recipe or an experience that talks specifically about kosher issues, but there are many, many examples of adaptations of a family that immigrated from Morocco in the 18th century to Brazil and replaced lemons with limes, and with their dafina, with their Shabbat Moroccan stew, they weren't able to find chickpeas. So they made like this almost like a dumpling from wheat in the same shape of a chickpea. So there are many, many stories on how cooks adapted to local ingredients and tradition. But I need to think about the kosher challenge.
Any more questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a quick story that I heard from last year. Prior to Rosh Hashanah, the husband of the matriarch of the family, this may be apocryphal, but even if it is, it's still a good story, said to his wife, "You are not cooking for this family this year. You haven't been well. It's too tiring for you. We are going to a restaurant." So she reluctantly said, okay. He came home one night and the house smelled of cooking. And he said, "You promised me you wouldn't cook for the holiday. We're going to a restaurant. What have you done?" And she said, "When we leave the restaurant, I have nothing to send home. I didn't cook for the meal. I cooked leftovers."
Love it.
So that's where I was sort of heading in that area, because the thing that resonates for some of us is are those smells. And I'm wondering whether that came up. I mean, we all sort of have I can't speak for everybody, but there's a strong Ashkenaz European recollection among a lot of us. But how about others? Did you find that in other cultures and other places?
You mean
Being so attracted to the smell of that you're used to around the holidays, around any holiday?
I mean, I can only guess that it's something that probably many cultures have in common, but I think for our culture, these fried onions are definitely there. I'm thinking about Shabbat, and let's start with frying some onions, and it will be fine, right? So, but I think what's very common, what's very special, is, I think, the number one ingredient of Jewish food, and I think that this ingredient is thyme. And I think that really contributes to the smell aspect in a major way.
My husband was a Greek Jew, and I had never had any introduction to that culture. Surprised me to find out he didn't know about Jewish cooking. He had never tried chopped liver. He didn't know about potato pancakes. And I'm wondering, is it a lack of product in those native countries? Because the Jews tend to be a clique, even here. Or is it patriotism to their newfound country? I'm not quite sure why the food hasn't reached them.
So again, I'm not sure if the food didn't reach them. I think that maybe what they experience is maybe they didn't call it Jewish food, but what some, I'm even thinking about my family, like Nana's family, her Greek dish for Rosh Hashanah, for example, is fried leek in a pet, in like not a meatball, but in a leek ball, or I don't know how to translate it to English. And this is very Jewish food, but it's Greek Jewish food. So I think maybe we need to think about it a little different and think that maybe it doesn't make sense to look for the very Ashkenazi staples in the Mediterranean, because also the way that the Ashkenazi traditions, some of the staples that we know, again, as we talked before, they were a reflection of the climate, of the people around them, of what was available during the very harsh winters. So it makes sense to fry potato and to preserve herring and other root vegetables. And maybe in Greece, it just would be a different interpretation of the holiday table, and this is exactly what we are celebrating and highlighting in the book.
So I know we're beginning to smell the sense of what we will be tasting. So we'll be tasting in about 5 or 10 minutes, but we'll take a few more questions first.
I'm also going to make a statement as opposed to actually asking a question. I grew up in a household where my father was an Ashkenazi Jew. His family had come from Russia. And my mother was Sephardic. Her family had come from Greece. And they used to laugh and say it was like a mixed marriage because the traditions were so different, particularly at holiday times like Passover. What you could eat at Passover varied tremendously one side of the family to the other. I think most of us in the New York area had an Ashkenazi background and failed to realize that the Sephardic foods, which we tend now to think of as Mediterranean cooking or even Israeli cooking or whatever, is every bit as Jewish, quote unquote, as matzo ball soup.
100%.
Did you find that there's a distinction between the cooking of the Jews who emigrated from that of the host country? So, for example, the cooking of the Ethiopian Jews, was that distinguished from the cooking of the Ethiopian people?
Yes, so again, many of the unique dishes were designed for Shabbat and to celebrate specific holidays. I think that the word, like I'm thinking specifically about the Ethiopian table that we have in the book, the word dabo is a general word to describe bread in Amharic, but for BJ, the chef who shared the recipe with us, this bread was a bread for Shabbat. So I think that we can look on different recipes and see the variation that made it different than food that were popular around the Jewish community. But I think also like the influence, it goes both ways. Like there are many examples that we see how Jewish tradition influence staples all around, outside the Jewish community. And we clearly see the other way around as we spend time talking about here.
Is Rome a good example of that? Rome? Rome? In Italy.
Rome, like in Italy. Sure. I mean, like there are a few Christmas traditions that, like in the book, we have the cazola, the cheesecake, that it's not exactly clear if the Jews are really responsible for that or if it's like a Christmas staple. Yeah.
Naama, this book is beautiful, and the illustrations are not illustrated. The pictures are gorgeous. I have a two-part question. One, how long did it take you to compile this and get it together? And second, how could you have chosen over 1,000 recipes and maybe more to highlight in this beautiful book?
Thanks for these questions. So it, again, I think about the book as a reflection of the last 7 years of research, but we actively worked for 3 years about the book. And when I say I didn't make it just by myself. It really literally took a village to create. Amanda Dell is here. She was the creative director of the book and really directed all of the photo shoots and other aspects of creating this book. As of your other question, so it was 3 years, like literally in the making. Your other question of how, like this is really like the core of the curation work. And this is what I love most in my work. And we really try to highlight some of the most generous, beautiful, high-spirited people we know. So it's a collection of really inspiring people. So as I said before, like we really wanted to lead with stories, not just with the most delicious, like menu. So some of these people are really truly like the most talented and generous people that I know. I'm thinking about Rinat Zadok. She's one of my best friends. She is responsible for the very like vegetable forward spring menu of Passover. Like I want to eat her food every day of the year and certainly on Passover. Sasha Shore also she shared a Soviet menu for Passover with old-fashioned gefilte fish and matzo ball soup and other specialties, and she is just a force. And just collaborating with her was extremely inspiring, and we learned so much from her. So we wanted to celebrate these people.
I would, first of all, I want to compliment you on your emails, which I've been receiving for however long, I don't even know. And I enjoy them immensely. They're wonderful. I recommend them to everybody. They tell beautiful stories, and they give you a wonderful recipe. And they're just...
Arlene is a member and not a plant from the Jewish Food Society. I want everyone to know.
Yeah, no, I'm not a plant.
Thank you.
But I do love to cook and eat, and I love to read recipes, and the stories are just wonderful. I love all of them. I unfortunately don't come from a background where anybody cooked Jewish food. My grandmother was Bohemian, and which is now the Czech Republic, and but she grew up in Kutná Hora, which is a little town near Prague, and I don't think there were many Jews there, but she cooked certain things that I've never seen in any Czech restaurants, and I've always wondered if they were Jewish. Something called srouhani and haxreji, and if anybody ever heard of it, I'd love to know the recipe. At any rate, but that was my background. But my mother did make brisket. That she did make. And but I thank you for this amazing book, and I thank you for this evening, and I toast you, and I wish you many, many years
Thanks so
of
much.
success and glamour and eating wonderful Jewish food.
Oh, thank you, L'chaim. And with a faluda, so it's great
So-
luck. Thank you.
On that note, maybe it's time for us to taste some of these amazing recipes. Do you want to tell us what we are tasting this
Sure,
evening?
absolutely. So we will have a faluda sib that came from Rotem Liberzon. She's based in Tel Aviv, but she has roots in Iran. And faluda is probably, some of you may know, it's an iconic Persian dessert that oftentimes made from rice noodles, but faluda sib is made from apples, and it's traditionally in Persian Jewish homes, people used to break the fast with that. But at Rotem's home, her grandma used to keep it in the fridge throughout the Chagai Tishrei, the high holidays. So it's part of the Rosh Hashanah tradition for her. So we're going to enjoy that. We're also going to have braised fennel from Jessica Saloniki, who is based in Buenos Aires, but she married into a Tunisian family, and this is part of their kimia, of their opening set of the brachot, of their blessing. So it's an extremely simple recipe, but it really, really brings the unique ability of fennel to be silky and delicious when it's cooked for a long time with olive oil and lemon. So that's great. And then we're gonna have a beef curry from Max Nye, who is a cook that is based in London, but he shared with us his extremely beautiful, vibrant table of his family that has roots in Baghdad, in Iraq, and his grandfather immigrated to Calcutta in 1877. And together with a very small but vibrant Jewish community, they really flourished for so many years in India before they moved to London. So we're going to have his curry and also his...
And the cake.
And exactly. And his honey cake that made of semolina and apricots. And it's so beautiful. It has very, very little sugar, this cake, but it's sweet from the apricot and the honey. So I really hope you'll enjoy it.
So thank you, Naama.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you all for coming. B'tei Avon, enjoy these tastes that are at the back of the room, and I hope you'll rejoin each other at our tables and chat some more. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
If you would like to get your cookbook signed, Naama is right here at the front of the room.
We'll sign here or there? Wherever? Where are the books?